in just a few minutes. Thank you so much for coming today. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. We're waiting for more people to join. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you for joining. We'll be starting in just about a minute. Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining. We will begin in just a couple of seconds.
Hi, my name is Sam Young. I'm the Senior Director of Legacy and Plan Giving at Compassionate Choices. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Focus On, where we cover various topics surrounding effective end-of-life planning. We know that planning equals peace. It is our objective to provide you with sound information that allows you to create the legacy you desire. With that said, let's meet Compassionate Choices Chief Engagement Officer, Brandy Alexander.
Thank you so much, Sam. I'm so excited to be here today, and thank you for joining us. I'll tell you a little bit about Compassionate Choices before we begin. We're the largest and oldest national nonprofit focused on expanding care and improving choice in end-of-life care through advocacy and education. Our mission is that we envision a society that affirms life, accepts the inevitability of death, and embraces expanded options, and empowers everyone to choose the end-of-life care that reflects their values, priorities, and beliefs. We improve care, expand options, and empower everyone to chart their end-of-life journey. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization with more than 450,000 supporters throughout the 50 states, Washington, D.C., Guam, and Puerto Rico. So we began this series as an enhancement to our current community engagement efforts. And that's really to meet people where they are in terms of planning and having informed decisions about end-of-life care. So we know that death and dying and end-of-life planning are very tough topics, but it's very necessary that we do this because we know that end-of-life is something that we're all going to have to face at some point. And so having the tools to do can really only help what's already a difficult situation. And so that's why we lead our efforts by saying planning equals peace. And then we joined with the development team because, as Ricardo says, planning, lack of planning is not only hazardous to your health, it's also hazardous to your wealth. And so financial planning is a very important aspect of complete end-of-life planning. So incorporating your end-of-life healthcare wishes and what happens with your assets is the best way, as Sam says it, to ensure that you have the legacy that you want. And making these plans is really the most loving thing you can do for your loved ones. And so we want more communities empowered with information, which is why we are doing this collaboration and why we think it's so important and valuable. So I'm excited to continue the series and with deep dives into these critical aspects of being fully empowered to advocate for yourself and your loved ones. So let's jump into today's discussion, and I will hand it over to our African American Engagement Director, Dr. Elisha Hall, who will be our moderator. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Brandy. I am joined today by two phenomenal people in this movement to help us know better about how to move in our families and how to protect our assets. And none other than Ricardo Thomas, who you all know and have seen and before, and has done great work with Compassionate Choices before. And we have a new face, Portia Wood, who also is doing a lot of great work in this field. And I'm going to have both of them introduce themselves, and then we're going to jump right in. So Ricardo, why don't you go ahead and start?
Well, thank you, Dr. Hall, and good afternoon to you and everyone assembled today. It's exciting to be here again to talk about this important topic and the importance of planning. As it relates to myself, I usually hate doing this, but I am a practicing financial consultant. I have been doing this now for almost 39 years. I am headquartered here in New Orleans, currently with a client base that spans across 12 states. My firm, Thomas Waddell and Associates, focuses on three crucial areas, which is financial planning. That's identifying and laying down or making sure you understand where you are or what you need to do. Phase two is the asset management or education or execution, I should say. And then the third leg of the stool is the educational or financial literacy component. You know, it's important for us to have knowledge so that we can make informed decisions. So I'm certainly excited to be a part of today's program and having a chance to be a part of a healthy discussion with a great co-speaker like Ms. Portia Wood. So with that, I'll turn it over to her.
Well, how do I follow that, Ricardo? Goodness gracious. Hi, you guys. My name is Portia Wood. I am a generational wealth planning attorney and partner of Wood Legal Group. We are a mother-daughter, multi-generational Black woman-owned and operated law firm that focuses on intergenerational wealth transfer, particularly in Black and Brown communities. Much like Ricardo said, we have clients that span the country, and we are really focusing on making sure that people can take agency over what they have created for themselves, for their families, so that they don't lose it in court processes that are 100% avoidable, and that they're able to truly build that generational wealth that we keep hearing about in these buzzwords. So I'm very excited to be here and to share with each of you today. And Dr. Hall, back to you.
This is excellent. And this is exciting. I mean, here we are with Black History Month, and we have two gurus, if you will, experts in the field talking about financial planning. This is exciting. I think this is going to be a lovely conversation and discussion. And we look forward to you all joining the discussion. Please use the chat to put your comments, put your questions, etc. as we go. If you have any questions with our two panelists here. So let's go ahead and kind of just start, with what brought you into the industry and what was your journey? I know, Ricardo, you talk a lot about how there are very few Black financial advisors. Can you talk about what brought you into this? And then we'll go to you, Portia.
Okay, well, thank you. So I guess if I had to narrow it down to two things, it was my love of math and my love or desire to help people. And financial planning allows me to do both. It allows me to continue to use those mathematical skills and my love of math, but more importantly, to bridge an information gap or an access gap as it relates to us making better financial decisions, and more importantly, doing what Portia just mentioned, creating generational wealth. Because as you said, and I remember when I started, and I know I'm going to date myself here, when I started in 1984, and I was only 2 then, mind you, don't do the math. But when I started in 1984, the profile for the financial industry was white, male, and age 47. And I was 18 as a freshman in college at that particular time. So obviously 2 of those, I didn't meet that criteria at that time. Fortunately, now I have met 2 of those. But the reality is, when it comes to financial expertise, we know historically that many of us have not had access to qualified financial professionals who understand the journey that we've been on, who understand when that debit man was knocking on the door on Saturday mornings for that $500 burial policy that grandma and grandpa had that they thought was sufficient to bury them. So all of these things, my family was no different. So seeing all of that and again, being able to use my skills and passion for it led me, to want to be in this industry and hopefully make a difference.
Wow. That's phenomenal. Portia, please, what brought you into the industry? What was your journey?
My journey was not as straightforward as Ricardo's. He seemed to know right away what he wanted to do. Originally, I didn't even want to be a lawyer. I was going to be a public relations professional. I was ready. And I actually got rear-ended by a drunk driver when I was in college. I ended up being in physical therapy. I ended up seeing how quickly life can change in an instant, right? All of the plans and things that I thought that I had going for me changed, right? And I had an opportunity to work inside of a civil rights law firm while I was recovering from this accident. And I participated in a case where we were representing a man who was a victim of police brutality, who had become a quadriplegic in Baltimore City as a result of police actions. And I realized I could be a voice for my community, that I wanted to be a voice for my community. And so I initially said, okay, I'm going to go to criminal court. And I started there, and I started in criminal. And as I was in the criminal court system and seeing how that process worked, I just kept seeing injustice and loss throughout the courthouse. I left criminal and went to civil and enjoyed the civil world, right? Working in real estate. But every time, the people who were losing were the people who looked like me. And I realized very quickly that it was the result of a lack of planning. People didn't have things in place to protect them. And so by the time they got to the courthouse, it was too late. There was nothing that could really be done except walk them through the process. It was already going to get lost at that point. And so my mother and I sat down. She had been working with very large estates and charitable giving from the nonprofit side. And we said, what if we take this knowledge and we start giving it to our community? If we can get enough people protected on the front end, they can avoid all of this loss on the back end. And so we kept doing the research on economic justice and where the loss was coming, why we weren't making a dent in this racial wealth gap in our society. And we found that only 13% of college educated African Americans were getting $10,000 or more to the next generation. This was not a study we did. It was published in the Atlantic back in 2017. You can look it up. But $10,000, that means 87% of college educated African Americans were not even getting $10,000 to the next generation. And it's not because we didn't have things. It was because it was getting eaten up in these different processes and nobody was guiding us. As it stands right now, our firm is less than 1% of 1% of female African American led firms, multi-generational firms at that, mother-daughter in the country. Wow. That do intergenerational planning. And so my journey really came from the evolution of seeing the loss and wanting to be that shield for my community. So like I said, my journey was not as straightforward as Ricardo's, but it kept evolving, and it felt like the community just kept calling. And so I said, if I've got the information, it's my job to share it.
Yeah, wow. That's just such phenomenal kind of stories, different yet still really profound. And I know, Portia, on your website, I mean, you're talking about this $10,000 loss. You say that 26 million African Americans, right, are losing or 70% are going to lose. What did you say? 30% of their wealth, right? So just, I mean, I know we're going to get into it, but it's not just that you all are doing these things because you care and you have this passion, but I love that you all are also bringing in the data. I'm a data person. You're bringing in the numbers, you're bringing in the statistics, you're saying, hey, listen, as Ricardo was saying, this is the math, and this is why we need to care about this, because we don't, which number do you want to represent? Which one do you want to, your family, to which side do you want to be on? So I think that is, that's really profound. It's really great. So what have been some of the challenges, in doing that work? Portia, we'll start with you and then go to Ricardo.
Yeah. So Dr. Hall, right? Numbers don't lie. Let's start there, right? And I feel, and Ricardo, you might agree with this, that some of the biggest impediments are we just don't know what we don't know. And you cannot protect yourself if you don't know what is coming for you. And what I find for the most part in our office is that this is the first time people have had this conversation. This is the first time that anyone's heard, some of the terms that we throw out. And so we have to spend a lot of time with baby steps, really explaining the different concepts. And even then, it's still overwhelming, right? And there's also been so much abuse in this area, particularly in our community, and we cannot, we have to address that, right? There is a actual abuse that has happened even most recently with the 2008 housing crisis. I mean, we think about these wealth building seminars where our community was being targeted with these subprime mortgages from the big banking institutions, despite the fact that people were highly qualified for regular mortgages. That is a recent history, right? Where people, and specifically the African-American community, lost 50% of our wealth in that housing crisis and haven't recovered. When we are talking to people about what they have spent their life building, it is an incredible amount of trust that they are putting into your hands. And we don't take that lightly. And it is important to try to always, give them as much information as possible. But I would say the biggest impediment is just knowledge, getting people the baseline information so that they can make truly informed decisions about what they want to do for their family and for their family's future.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I appreciate you bringing in the housing crisis, because then that was exactly to your point. But and then more recently as well, we also have these recent, financial, a loss of wealth in the last couple of years, and we know that the pandemic also created a loss of wealth. So these are on top stack. It's like almost stacking on top of stacking on top of stacking. Ricardo, to you, what are some of the challenges that you've also experienced?
Okay, so I'm going to approach it a little bit differently because she did such a great job in talking about the challenges, from a planning or kind of a community standpoint. So I'm going to start from the aspect of professionals. There's an old saying, you can't be what you don't see. Okay. And I remember growing up in church, how many times we would hear our parents or especially our grandparents say, oh, well, my son or daughter is going to be a lawyer, a doctor, a teacher, or a nurse. No one was saying be a financial advisor because we didn't know what that was. We didn't have access to those folks. So how can we possibly dream about or aspire to be what we don't even know exists? Even to Portia's field, obviously folks talked about being a lawyer, but did they even know about estate planning attorneys? I mean, for most of us, the mindset was, well, I don't have anything anyway, so why do I need someone like that? So I think that was one of the, the first challenges of the lack of mentors or people who look like us. And let me get back in the camera here. A lack of mentors or people who look like us that we could, reach out to for advice, for direction. And so for many of us who were kind of the trailblazers, if you will, in these respective areas, it was like, we had to learn by trial and error. You just had to go out there and beat the streets and just gather as much knowledge as you could, from every event or person who was willing to share with you. And of course, that creates an information gap, going back to what Portia was saying, because if we don't have access to even be those professionals, then how can our community address these very important issues when they don't have the right people to go to or even know that they need these type of professionals? So that was the main thing, I think, certainly when I first started in my career. I know with the firm that I originally was with, there was no one that looked like me,
Yes.
At that particular time. And unfortunately, all of these years later, and I tell people all the time, if I was to take a bet back then that, these 38, 39 years later, that the financial industry, that we would still be so underrepresented, I would have lost that bet. Because today, unfortunately, we still have not closed that gap. I mean, we know the wealth gap exists, but the financial professional, or I should say people of color of financial professionals, that gap still exists as well. Especially when you start to layer on those who have the proper credentials, licenses, affiliated with reputable firms, doing it on a full-time basis, and not like the guy on Sanford and Son, jack of all trades, master of none. We are few and far between. So that's something that we continue to work on. And certainly that's part of my mission as well, is to be able to create that next generation of planners so that we can pass the baton on. That is so, so important when we talk about creating generational wealth. We also need to create a generational pathway of professionals, whether it be financial advisors, attorneys like Portia, and many, many others, so that that these needs can continue to be addressed properly in our community.
I appreciate you taking us there, Ricardo. And I can imagine, I mean, we see that everywhere. We see it in education. We see it, even we see it in the medical, industry and healthcare and, all these fields. Portia, can you talk about, you said you were 1%. I mean, what was it like as a Black woman kind of moving through some of these spaces Ricardo was talking about where you're not seeing yourself, and what did you have to deal with kind of spearheading that?
Yeah, it's a different kind of conversation, right? I am a member of the American Academy of Estate Planning Attorneys. It is an invite-only sort of organization. I am one of about 5 Black people now inside of the organization, which is nationwide. When I came in, I was one of 3. So we're growing. 2 of them, are at retirement age. So they've been at this for a little while. But they are making that transition into retirement, and when they're gone, there's not really anybody coming up in the rear. And as they say, all skin folk aren't kinfolk, right? So there are pieces to that as well. But when we show up in these different spaces, I tend to bring up the conversation of, well, what are you doing with your clients who maybe have been impacted by the war on drugs, right? And if you have attorneys who don't even believe that the war on drugs was a war on Black people, and that it was really on Black people and on poor people, and it was really just a policy issue, and they don't know the social and systemic issues that have spawned from it, how can they protect your family? How can they adequately protect you if they're not even thinking about the social issues that have come into play? If they're thinking about, the things that have come up with redlining, and they're doing what we call balance sheet estate planning, and they're only doing a plan based on what your net worth is, you're not going to get a comprehensive plan, right? You're going to get something far less, because they're going to say, this is what your asset level justifies. But let's be clear, if you don't have a comprehensive plan to protect whatever it is that you have, it's not going to be protected. And so when you walk in these spaces, I tend to have to challenge the status quo of those who are in the room and how they've done it before, to the point where I actually created a program on culturally competent estate planning, right, for lawyers specifically. And I did that talk for the Maryland State Bar Association Estates and Trust section to say, here are some of the things to be a culturally competent advocate for your client. You've got to do these things, because it's not just about making sure there's more brown faces in the room. It's about making sure that the people who are doing this work understand what we're facing, and how to adequately create and craft plans that will protect us, because our needs are different than our counterparts in other spaces. So, I think one of the biggest impediments with being one of the only is that we are also then put into the position of having to, if we care, having to also try to educate those around us to rise all tides, so that it truly can benefit the whole community, because we can't be everywhere.
Wow. This is deep. This is powerful. Here, and really taking the estate planning and the equity and the social justice, and really putting it all together. I think that's just phenomenal. And I see a lot of head nods from Ricardo, so I know that we're in alignment, and he's in agreement. So let's shift from the challenges to successes. What are some of the successes? What are some of the contributions that you've been able to make in your work and in the industry? We'll start with you, Ricardo.
Wow. Well, given that I've done this for so long now, I think for me, the payoff has been being able to see the fruits of my labor, working with families. I mean, I'm proud to say that I'm literally working with 3rd generations in families now. That's because I started so young, but I'm working with 3rd generations, and, to to be invited to family events where they acknowledge and say, well, you know, I was able to send my kids to school because of what he assisted us with, you know, many years ago, or go to weddings and say, well, you know, this was a result of, you know, meeting Ricardo and planning many years ago, or even when there's a death, you know, or disability in the family, and being able to make a smooth transition with that, because we know that can be not only emotionally devastating to lose a loved one, but also financially devastating when we lose that loved one who was an income provider. You know, so I think for me, that's the greatest reward of being able to see those results. And then most importantly, I would say probably re-educating them to think differently, not only about their finances, but planting that seed for the next generation, and be willing to share that information, you know, with others around them. I mean, Portia alluded to it earlier, not all skin folk are kinfolk. And because we have been hurt so many times over the years, you know, from or taken advantage of financially, we are reluctant, you know, to share, or sometimes, and we know this is what I like to call one of our isms, or, well, I don't want people to know my business, you know, and all of that kind of stuff. So we are reluctant to share with someone else, you know, that, you know, here's someone who can help me. Perhaps they can help you too. So being able to kind of to re-educate them and help them to realize that we're all in this together. And again, as Portia said, a rising tide raises all boats. So when you win, I win. The entire community wins, because the pie is big enough for all of us. And that's one of the key things. Many times we think, well, I got to get it all. I got to be better than you or have more than you. And in trust, there's enough for everybody. But I would say for me, that's the biggest, you know, contribution, the biggest payoff is seeing those successes. And you know, on the other end, on the professional side of it, being able to go out to various different schools and community programs and plant seeds in that next generation, you know, where, especially for young Black boys, to be able to see us, you know, in this particular aspect and say, well, this is something too that you can aspire to. Not everyone's going to be a rapper. Not everyone's going to be a football player or a basketball player, but this is another option where you can be successful and make a difference in your community. So those are the things that I think for me are the greatest rewards.
Yeah, I love it. Intergenerational wealth and knowledge transfer, you know.
Yes.
Planting those seeds, that's excellent. Portia, what about you?
I mean, I'd have to sort of second that, right, from Ricardo. The ability to see your work transform families is one of the biggest blessings. You know, we've been in this now, and unfortunately, what we do is people pass away, and then that's when these documents really come into play. For the most part, right? Some of it is during life, but you know, we've seen people make these transitions, and these documents and these plans that we've put in place for different families keep them out of the court structure, where in a place like California, you know, our fees, much like the rest of the country, our probate fees are set by statute, typically by the gross value of the estate. And so if you've got, let's say, $1 million property or home, your probate fees are typically going to be about $48,000 before you even get into court fees or anything else. And you're thinking about that immense amount of loss just by going through this court process, and knowing that we were able to save that inside of someone's family, knowing that the plan that we put in place was able to save the assets, knowing that, you know, someone who may have had an incarcerated beneficiary or someone receiving government services didn't lose those benefits, and they still got to benefit from what their parent had created for them. So being able to see the plan work is the greatest benefit. And then going one step further, right, working with people like Ricardo, getting those families into places where they are now investing that money. They're thinking about their financial future. They're thinking about family as a business, because we may have represented the parents, but they have 3 kids and now they've inherited stuff and they're not sure what to do with it. And there's this structure that's in place that the parents created that give them divorce protection, some creditor protection, et cetera. And they're like, okay, well, how do we keep this going? And they go to people, we refer them to people like Ricardo, who can help them set up those plans. So seeing the wealth accumulation happen in a really short time with a concerted plan has been just the greatest joy. So it makes every day worth it.
Mm. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I appreciate those specific examples, and especially in how this work can kind of be different from one, state to the next, from one community to the next, from different family to the next. You really do have to do this kind of relationship building that Ricardo's talking about, but then also kind of pin it down to the needs in particular of each that you're talking about, Portia. And that does take a lot of juggling and personalization. You have your toolbox, if you will, but you're not going to just you don't give the same family, every family doesn't get the same tools, right? They don't get the same so I really like how you all are breaking that down and some of the ways that you approach the work. And it kind of, I have a question, so why is it important for you to do that? Like, why is this important for you to be able to show up in that way? Like, what is that? What kind of joy does that bring you? And why is it important for other people to know and to find people like you to make these plans? Portia, we'll start with you.
Oh man, I am the beneficiary of planning, right? I have seen what a little bit of planning can do and the generational or intergenerational impact it can have. My great grandfather was born an enslaved person in Montgomery County, Maryland. He was the biological child of his enslaver. He and his wife and their 4 children were passed in the enslaver's estate plan, right? When he passed away, he had no legitimate children. My ancestor was able to subsequently buy his freedom, the freedom of his wife, of his children, and the land they tilled as enslaved people. He subsequently did an estate plan with really important tweaks, right? He put a restriction on the sale of that land. He left it to his children, but if they wanted to sell it, they needed to sell it to their sibling first. And my great-great-grandmother did. She sold her plot of land, her quarter, to her brother. It kept the property in the family until the 70s. We're talking about from the 1800s to the 1970s. My grandmother or great-great-grandmother gave a portion of that money to her husband, who founded the Afro-American newspaper, which is the longest continuously running Black newspaper in the country, family-owned Black newspaper in the country. It's 130 years old. So when we talk about these tweaks and what it looks like, why that paper still exists is because of trusts and consolidation of voting shares and planning, right? A plan that somebody made that we continue to operate within that system, and it keeps that system moving forward. I'm, 6 and 7 generations down the line, we're talking 130 years later, and we're still able to have that conversation because of somebody's plan. Was it the best plan that could have ever existed? No. Knowing what I know, would I have done something different for them 130 plus years ago? Yes. But what they did do was write it down, which was so much more than other people of the time. And what that impact was is that generations later, we are still seeing the success from that one plan. And so it tells me, and I'm allowed to give sort of that testimony to others, that your one plan, your one decision can change the lives of generations beyond you. And so that gives me joy, because I also recognize that I am incredibly privileged in the fact that that is not what everybody else has experienced. And so I'm uniquely situated to be able to have that conversation and show directly what that can mean in our community. And I, again, from a family of generations of people who have written things down, the reason the newspaper existed in the first place was to tell our stories, to inform our community, to tell us about what was happening in legal changes and what was happening around the country, because nobody else was telling our stories. I feel like I am just in the newest rendition of what our family legacy has always been, of telling this story, of telling our community and sharing with our community how these different laws and aspects impact them and how we can protect ourselves. It's just a different iteration of the exact same thing that my family's been doing for generations.
Wow.
So it's
That,
ingrained, if you.
I mean, I love it. That's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful story, just the fact that that was passed on, that's that Black land loss. There's so much Black land loss happening in this country because of a lack of planning, of a lack of having it written down. And for you to share a story that's talking about Black land preservation and connecting it to, end of life planning and estate planning, I just think that that's, exceptional, in terms of like, how that, you hold on to that legacy. I think that's just phenomenal. Ricardo, for you as well, like what about for you? What is important for you, and what kind of brings you to this every day?
Well, I'll go back to the first part of your question as to why we do what we do. And I'll say first, well, if we don't, then who will? We can't always expect someone else to do it for us. We have to roll up our sleeves and say, well, if I want something done, then I got to get out in the fight and get it done. And it kind of goes back to what you were talking to Portia about, where it is not a one size fits all. No two people's situations, no two family situations are the same. And so as professionals, in our respective areas, we have to be able to understand those different nuances and relate to them on their level and speak to them as it relates to what are their specific priorities. So that's why it's important. And I was so excited to hear Portia mention about teaching the professionals, the cultural differences and so forth. Because we can say financial planning, we can say estate planning, but I mean, I'll give an example. We don't come from a history of trust and estates. We come from a history sometime of bills and collections. You know what I mean? So we have to re-educate or uneducate. We have to meet people where they are, because oftentimes the way the media projects it and so forth, oh, well, that's too high society for me. That's above where I am. So I don't need to plan or whatever. I told someone, I know I'm getting a little bit ahead here, but these are the things that we need to do. And it's incumbent upon us as professionals to emphasize to folks that no matter where you are, you need to have a plan. Not every plan is elaborate. And that's where the educational component comes in, because once we educate them, and most importantly, let me say not educate, but connect, then you see the light bulbs go off and say, oh, now I get it. And then we can do all of those great things that happened in Portia's family, where they realize it. Because I think right now there's been a gap in understanding the importance of passing something on. That was, I remember growing up as a little boy, my grandfather and my great uncles and so forth, that's all they emphasized all the time, wanting to do something or have something to be able to pass on to the next generation. And somewhere around the 80s, we became the myself, thing. Well, I'm not worried about anybody else. Nobody left anything for me. And that kind of short-term thinking or selfish thinking has gotten us to where we are now. Think about this, whole thing as a relay race. If someone can kind of run a part of the race and pass the baton on to me or the next person, think about how much further we can go along, as opposed to each of us having to start at square one all the time. So I think that's the thing there. And I'm just excited myself, just hearing, Portia's journey and expertise, because, in my years of doing this, it is very, very rare that I see someone that looks like us that has that expertise that she has there. So I'm just as excited not only to participate, but to listen as well.
I know that's right. I love that. I really appreciate that, Ricardo, and just kind of bringing that. If not us, then who? I think that's excellent. We would definitely want to remind people to put your questions, comments in the chat. We do have a question. We'll get to that shortly. I do want to get back to a point Ricardo was making, and actually is right on time. And we'll go to you, Portia, first. But this is a conversation around people who did plan. So you kind of started off talking about your, great, maybe another
All
great.
the way up there. The great,
That's right.
greats,
That's
all the way
right.
up there.
Several greats, grandfather. Can you, and when we talk about Dick Gregory planned, Aaron Carter, Kobe Bryant, I mean, Tupac, like, can we talk about some of this, like, folks that did plan and what they did and the examples, that we want to lift up, because I think oftentimes too often, if in fact, we're talking about what did not happen. So let's talk about some of those examples where folks did plan and it worked out really for their families.
Yeah, so one of the things that I would say is that in the situations where people did plan, we don't know anything about it. Because if you've planned well, your family details are private. And that is a powerful thing. When we talk about the people who don't plan, the reason we talk about that is because we have direct public access to all of their information, and we can see the level of loss because the public records are there. When people have done a good comprehensive plan for their family, for their asset levels, they've avoided that court process, and that is private. Kobe Bryant, we know a little bit about his planning only because he hadn't timely updated to add on his youngest daughter. And so Vanessa ended up having to go into the probate court in Los Angeles and ask a judge's permission to add their youngest daughter, Capri, to the estate plan that they had done. But it was not a full probate process. It was very truncated and just dealing with that one really limited issue of making sure their youngest daughter was a part of this comprehensive planning that they had done. Outside of that, the way he had his plan structured, how those assets passed, what kind of restrictions and incentives are a part of that plan, we just don't know, nor should we, right? That is a private matter between the family. And so when you've planned well, nobody should know who received your assets. Nobody should know how much they got. Nobody should know what restrictions they have, because it should be private. When we think about some of the other people, Michael Jackson did a plan. One of his fatal flaws of his estate planning was that they hadn't properly funded the plan, right? So there were some issues with actually transferring title. And when I say funding and people go, what is that? It means changing title to the assets you own. So you have a home, you have a new deed that is in the name of your trust, not in your personal name. You have bank accounts. Those bank accounts are in the name of your trust, not your personal name. If they are in your personal name, a court has to transfer them out of your personal name. Generally, right? There are exceptions, but generally a court would have to transfer them out of your name. And so what you need is to make sure that you funded or transferred title to all of these assets to avoid the court process. When we think about some of the other people who have planned really well, again, we just don't know who they are. We know that they passed and we don't know anything about it. I would say John Singleton is another one, right? We know that a portion of his estate ended up in the probate court, nowhere near the full estimated value of his estate. So we think it was really just a small portion of something that was left outside of his larger estate plan. We do know that he had some form of estate planning because when he was incapacitated, decisions were able to be made quickly. And there was no fighting. There were people already designated to step up. There were wishes already outlined for how he would want to be cared for in that situation. And so that is a really good example of something happened and immediately the family was able to take affirmative steps to honor him and make sure that he was cared for the way that he wanted to be. In comparison to that of Anne Hesh, the actress who was in a car accident just recently, and we are still seeing the headlines of her son fighting over her estate. As you know, I mean, this is past now, but we were seeing those headlines of her son really having to battle for control over her estate because there wasn't anything in place. And that's really the big difference. Having that control, having peace of mind, having the ability to move things along timely, understanding what somebody's wishes are, and working collaboratively versus having to fight, having issues involving the court, family infighting, people believing that they're the one who should be responsible because they're the oldest, or I'm the smartest, or I'm the this, that, and the third. And all we see is these rifts and division. And every time we have this division, what each rift is loss of economics. Each rift is what somebody created dwindling away because people can't find a way to work together. And when we're in immense amounts of grief, the best plan you can have is one that provides guidance, the one that provides protection, one that helps people move through the process with as little complication as possible.
Yeah.
And so those people who did the best planning in that way, we don't know anything about it because there was no drama to report.
Wow, this is just very rich and insightful discussion we're having here. We're going to go to some of the comments and questions from the folks who are listening along. I might not say this name correctly, but Matevi Lapsky shared that, she wants us to discuss the challenges, particularly in the South, where later generations are holding very small percentages of inherited property and are being barred out, and then a partition lawsuit is filed and the buyer steps in and picks up the property for virtually nothing. How can a land trust be used to are bought out, she said. How can a land trust be used? I actually have experience starting a community land trust here in Chicago. I know that there's something that we use to preserve land. And so, Ricardo, can you talk about how land trust can be used in this situation? And Portia, you can add anything to that.
So I'm going to start the answer, and then I'm going to transition that over to Portia. The first thing that I'm going to say is this: information is only as good as the source. Okay? So we have to make sure that when we're talking about putting together a plan, that we are dealing with folks who are competent and know what they're doing. I can't tell you how many times over the years that people have said, oh, well, Uncle Joe from down the street said you can do it like this, and Grandpa this, that, and the other say, oh, you don't need to do all of that. Just write it, put in an envelope and all of that. The second thing tied to that is we have to have those tough conversations. Too many times in our communities, when we start thinking about or wanting to talk about estate planning, the first thought that comes to mind many times, oh, they're trying to kill me. Let me lock up everything and all of that. The reality is we all know we're going to leave here. It's a question of when, not if. So that being the case, if we want a specific outcome, just as Portia was alluding to, we have to have a plan. And it's funny that unfortunately, more of us spend more time planning our next vacation than our estates. Something's wrong with that equation. So if we really want to create generational wealth, if we really want to keep family peace, then we have to sit down with competent professionals, not folks who are going to tell us what we want to hear, but to tell us the truth and give us a game plan as to what it will take. And we have to also be willing to pay for it. That's the other part. You get what you pay for. That's so critical in this process, with that. But getting into the specifics of this question here, I'm going to transition because that's more of a legal question. So I'm going to defer to Portia to address that one.
Okay, so I always give my disclaimers in these kinds of things. I am not anybody's lawyer on this platform. This is not legal advice. You should always seek out an attorney in your jurisdiction for specific questions for whatever you have going on in your particular situation. That being said, there are several different things that people can do in terms of strategies. It often will depend, right? Everyone's least favorite answer, but it depends on the circumstances. We know that land loss in the South is a huge issue. We know that billions and billions of Black wealth has been lost because of the heirship process in the South specifically, where people don't have, or they have fractional ownership, or they haven't effectively changed title, and now they're generations down the road and they cannot prove ownership. These are big problems. Now, the solutions to those problems vary greatly on what's actually happening with that property. If you've got an open plot of land and there's commercial activity going on it and you're using it as a business, sometimes what people will do is the overarching owner will put it inside of their living revocable trust. Upon their passing, it will, become irrevocable for the benefit of the beneficiaries. That irrevocable trust provides incredible amounts of protection for the beneficiaries. That trust may also have that property held inside of a business structure, a family limited partnership or a family LLC, that then creates fractional ownership for the subsequent members of that family, so that they can get portions of that income off of that property, versus having fractional ownership of the whole, right, of a deed, not like a 1/38 of a sliver of a piece of property, but they have 1/38 in terms of the business. The business owns 100% of that land, and the trust owns 100% of that business. So you have all of these different pieces that can be employed to protect land generationally. The biggest issue is keeping the deed whole, because when you have fractional deeds, you end up in these situations like partition hearings and other things. And if you can't prove ownership or you aren't in a position to buy out the other person, then developers come in and they will take this property from us. Now, land trusts have value and they've gotten a lot of, I will say, popularity recently. But a land trust is just a type of living trust, but the only asset type that it really holds is real estate and related real estate assets. So physical property, notes, mortgages, air rights, other things related to real estate. But there are a few really big disadvantages. They are not great for asset protection. They can be incredibly expensive to create as well as to maintain. And when you're financing and managing these properties, it can be incredibly cumbersome. They may require that they come out of the land trust to get refinancing or just not finance you at all. And so when I say it depends, every situation depends. And what the best solution for you is going to be in that circumstance is really going to be about, well, how many people are we looking at? What is the property that we're looking at? What is the goal of how it's going to be used, et cetera, to determine what's going to be the right mechanism for protecting that land. If we already have a whole bunch of people who own fractional shares and they want to try to create something, they can look at a land trust and put their shares into it. They can also look at a family LLC or a family limited partnership and create a business structure from that land, which then gets the deed back to the whole. It also will outline who's responsible for paying taxes and the insurance, et cetera, i.e. making the business responsible and all of them as owners, versus all of them as owners and one person pays it and they get no benefit and then they want to sell it or leverage and they can't. So I know that was an incredibly long answer to your question, just for me to say it depends, but it depends.
No, I appreciate it, and I think that was really extremely thorough, and I know that really gave them a lot of options, and so thank you for that. We're going to try to get through at least a couple more, and then leave them with some general first and next steps. I know you have a sixth portion. You have 6 things that people need and must have. We'll get to that at the close. Another question, just a comment from Will Craig. This dialogue is incredibly insightful and invaluable. We have one from J. Cole. I made some plans, but who can I get to carry out my wishes? Is there such a thing as a professional executor? I have no relatives, heirs, or close friends to do it. Beneficiaries would be charitable organizations. I'm 74 years old in California. Would I contact the American Academy or an estate planning attorney? To either of you.
So
I'll
yes,
start it and tag team it.
I was like, I am in California, so you can contact me directly through our office. But I would also say that yes, there are professional fiduciaries. I know Ricardo's shaking his head, so I'll let you jump in as well. But almost every major financial institution has a trust department that manages trust, either special needs trust for those who are receiving government services, which is an entirely separate division, or just a traditional trust officer. There are also private fiduciaries that exist, and almost many investment companies also have a trust department because they also manage the assets. Oftentimes they have mandatory minimums. And so you want to make sure that you are finding the right person who you meet their minimums and they also meet whatever your goals are. I always tell my clients, particularly if it's someone who's going to be managing for their families for the future, is interview them. For me personally, I always ask the question, do you guys invest in private prisons? Because the only thing that's left of my values is my estate, and my 5-year-old son, I don't want him thinking that I value money over people's lives. And so if you invest in private prisons, you're not the right fiduciary for me, because I wouldn't want my money going there. Now that's just me, right? That's not everybody else. Some people are like, I don't care, give me my money. But for me, if there are things that are valuable to you, you should write them down and then have that conversation with the fiduciaries, because you're interviewing them and they should be able to tell you how they will manage your estate once you're gone, to make sure that you are being honored in that space.
Absolutely.
And I'll just chime in a little bit on that. I mean, because she hit it on the head. It really goes back to understanding what team you need around you to get this done. Because a common theme that I'm seeing from the questions that have been put in the chat here is folks first need to understand what their circumstances are. And then from there, identify which professional or team of professionals that would be needed in order to get to the destination that Portia's been talking about. So a lot of it starts with a financial planner, of having that conversation, because we're kind of that bridge, if you will, of sitting down with you, of trying to help interpret your situation and then determine, just like Portia said, well, do we need the estate planning attorney, or do you not have family members who could serve in a role as an executor or an executrix? Do we now have to go to, a corporate fiduciary and so forth? And for a lot of individuals, it can be very overwhelming. When they start hearing these 3 and 4 syllable words, it's, oh man, this is too much. Forget it. I'll get back to it later. And all of a sudden something happens and the situation hasn't been addressed. And now we're back to square one, and all of these problems, in losing land because taxes weren't paid, and insurance, and all of these kinds of things like that. So we have to sit down with someone who can help simplify it. And I think that's the best word for it there. Simplify it, and then navigate or point us in the right direction as to what professionals we need to get it done. Because again, as Portia said, it depends. Not every situation is complex. Not every situation is simple. So some of these tools, in the last few years, everyone has kind of gone trust crazy. Oh, I heard at 2 o'clock in the morning, you need to do a trust and all of this kind of stuff. Well, it's not a one size fits all. There are different types of trust, and you have to make sure you have the right one to accomplish the goal that you're trying to do. Some trusts will not give you that protection that you're looking for, and so forth. But if you don't know that, then you've gone down that road thing. Oh, I got it covered now. Such and such said at 3 o'clock for $2.99, I can get this done. And lo and behold, something happens, and you realize that what you put in place, what it is not working as you thought. So it definitely pays to sit down with someone who's qualified to, take a look at what you have in place, because if it's good, then fine, then you have that confirmation that you're in the right direction. But if it's not, then they can point you in the right direction, either where they can assist you or refer you to someone competent like Portia or myself to assist them, in getting the job done. It really many times takes a team effort. I can tell you, when we get into this part of it, I don't do it by myself.
Excellent. I love it, Ricardo.
Absolutely.
We're going to take 30 seconds from each of you to wrap up with this last question. What are some clear next steps that people, this has been such a robust conversation. Maybe we'll bring you all back for round 2. I think if you all will come, because this is great. Real quick, 30 seconds from each of you. I'll start with you, Portia. What do people need? What are clear next steps that they can take? I know you have 6 items that must be in an estate plan. Go ahead, Portia, and then Ricardo.
Yeah, I would say there's really 3 categories, right? There are 3 things everybody over the age of 18 needs to make sure they have in their estate plan today. The first is going to be their property power of attorney. This document might be called something different depending on what state you're in. It might be a uniform statutory power of attorney. But in essence, what it is a legal document that allows someone to step up and manage your financial and personal affairs if you can't. You're in a car accident, you get COVID-19, you're in the hospital, you're in a coma, you get dementia. Something happens, you get hit by a bus, something happens and you are unable to manage these affairs for yourself, if you don't have someone legally designated, then the court has to go through what's called a guardianship or conservatorship process, depending again on your state, to elect someone to be that person for you. The second thing is going to be your medical directives. Who is legally authorized to make medical decisions for you? That is not necessarily your spouse or your kids or your parents. Once you turn 18, you do not automatically have a fiduciary. And so you have an obligation to name someone that you would want to have authority over these sorts of long-term care medical decisions for you. If you don't, again, it is a conservatorship or guardianship proceeding I call living probate, because you have to bring the probate court in for a judge to make a determination. Those first two things that I've mentioned have nothing to do with how much money you have, and everything to do with the fact that you are a legal adult in the United States, right? And that means 18 or emancipated minor. So the third thing, and this is the one people think of as estate planning, and it really is only one portion of estate planning, and it's going to be your distribution plan. And this distribution plan could be a will and a trust. For most people, it's probably going to be a combination of a will and a trust. But the distribution plan is based on your family structure, married, single, minor kids, adult kids, blended family, people who are incapacitated, your family structure, your asset levels, what kinds of assets are inside of your estate. Do you own real estate? Do you rent? Do you have a business? What kinds of assets are there? And then your goals, because what you are trying to achieve is going to help dictate what this plan looks like. If you say to me, Portia, I'm trying to create intergenerational wealth, then we may be leveraging life insurance and other products that can create money or liquidity events that you can then protect in a really comprehensive structure that then protects this money intergenerationally. You might not have what you think is wealth today, but we're creating a plan that will perpetuate wealth for generations to come. That's all about your goals, right? So those main things are what everybody over the age of 18 needs: your property powers of attorney, your healthcare directives, and a distribution plan that is correct for your family structure, your asset levels, and your goals. When I say where do people go for next steps, we do webinars in our office. We have one that's today at 12:30 Pacific on estate planning with minor children. We have another one that's at the end of the month. I think it's February 21st, which is just wills, trusts, and generational wealth. It is important for people to understand what the process looks like, because you can't even begin to think about how to protect your family or what your goals might actually be until you know what's possible. So
Absolutely.
I would say education is really the very first place people should start.
I love it. Thank you for that. That was wonderful, Portia. Ricardo, take us home really quickly.
Definitely. And I'll make it really quickly. What she said. In addition to that, the only other thing, because she did such a great job in covering it all, the only thing I would be able to add to that is don't be afraid to get help. I think that's the biggest hurdle in our community, a reluctance to want to reach out and admit what we don't know. Don't be afraid, to pay someone, because if we want to get those outcomes that we want, that we all talk about, it doesn't happen by accident. Okay. We just can't pray over it. We got to be about it. Okay. So that's the only thing I could add to what she said there, because she did a great job of covering it all. So good job, Portia.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ricardo, Thomas, and Portia Wood. Phenomenal, phenomenal, phenomenal. Everyone for coming and joining us today. We will get their information out to you. We will share links with you. We will share resources with you for all those who joined the conversation. And Sam is also available to assist you with your plan giving and other resources. So, just thank you. We apologize for going over time, but as you can see, there's so much here. We're trying to, put it into a small bit, and don't worry, we're going to have more conversations to come. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.